Thursday on a Thursday afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. My name is Annie Volk, and I am one of the coordinators of this event, and I'm really happy to welcome you all here tonight. I am the director of the American Social History Project, which is a research center at the City University of New York. So that's where I am in New York. And I'm one of the organizers, as I said, of tonight's event, along with Stacy Brensilver Berman, who is here with us tonight, but unable to participate on camera. So we're grateful that she's here and sorry that she can't participate more actively. As many of you know, if you know Stacy, she's a brilliant scholar and a really generous educator who has worked tirelessly to support new and veteran teachers in their professional development, particularly in their quest to develop more inclusive classes and classrooms. Stacy's the director of programs in social studies education at NYU, and tonight's event is made possible thanks to her program there. For several years, Stacy and I worked together to run a summer institute for middle and high school teachers focused on teaching LGBTQ plus histories of the United States. We had a wonderful time. It was an amazing, amazing program that we offered until the Trump administration changed the funding priorities of the NEH, and we've no longer been able to get grants to run that program. So until the funding picture changes, which we hope it will, we are going to try to offer programs like tonight's presentation to fill in some of the gaps. So please look out for additional sessions in the months to come. So tonight, I'm really excited that you have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Jake Newsome. Jake is a public historian and a scholar and the author of the recently published book, Pink Triangle Legacies, Coming Out in the Shadow of the Holocaust. It's a wonderful book, really, really deeply researched and just full of amazing information, but also an incredibly immersive read. So I highly recommend the book. The book covers the history of Nazi persecution of queer people, the ways that this history of persecution shaped later laws, as well as public perceptions of LGBTQ plus people, and the ways that LGBTQ plus activists in Europe and in the United States incorporated the history and the memory of Nazi persecution into their activism and community building. Jake is also the founder of the Pink Triangle's Legacies Project, which we'll have a chance to hear more about, which was established as a way to use public education, empowerment, and advocacy to fight queerphobia and transphobia in the present. So he'll tell us more about the work of the Pink Triangle Legacies Project and some of the resources that they have made available for teachers. Just one piece of housekeeping before I turn it over to Jake, which is please do keep yourselves muted during the presentation. However, Jake, as he'll explain, will give us opportunities to unmute and ask questions, and there'll also be some time at the end. So there's plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions that way. You're also welcome to put questions or comments in the chat, and we'll make sure that Jake has a chance to address them. So Jake, turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Annie, and to Stacy, to both of you and your programs for, continuing this work. As you mentioned, it's a really difficult time to do LGBTQ education work right now, and so it's incredibly important that we continue to find ways to gather in spaces like this one to talk about how can not only why is it important, but how can we teach LGBTQ history and what resources remain available to folks. And so it's really an honor to be here with all of you in this digital space this evening slash afternoon. If you want to, you can drop in the chat where you're logging on from. I'm joining y'all from sunny San Diego, where I live and work now. Um, as Annie mentioned, um, I am the founder and president of the Pink Triangle Legacies Project. It's a LGBTQ public history nonprofit, and we do a lot of different things. But one of the things that we do is to try to make the history of the Nazis' persecution of LGBTQ folks free and as accessible to as many people as possible. There is some great research that has been done on the topic by my colleagues across the world, but unfortunately, the way that academic publishing works is that a lot of that research exists behind paywalls or in prohibitively expensive, monographs. And so we've been working with all of these experts across the world to get this information from behind paywalls and make it accessible to, as I said, as many people as possible. So one of the ways we do that is by creating resources that not only students and learners can access, but also that educators can use in their classroom, whether that might be a traditional classroom space or at a community center, a synagogue, or any other type of place of community and communal learning. So what I'm going to do this evening is that the session is going to be kind of broken up into three parts. The first is I'm going to go through about a 20-minute long lecture on the history itself, on the history of the Nazi persecution of LGBTQ folks. That is just to make sure that we are all working from kind of the same common historical understanding. After that, I'll pause, I'll take some questions, and then I'm going to walk you through our organization's website to show you all of the different free educational resources that are available to you. And then the third session, I'm actually going to walk you through one of the classroom ready activities that we have on how to really address this topic in the classroom. So without further ado, I will let me make sure that yes, that should work. I'm going to go ahead and get started then with the lecture. So a central aim of the Nazi regime in Germany was to establish what they called a Volksgemeinschaft, or what translates into as a racially pure national community. And as the Nazi Party gained more followers and eventually more political power in Germany, they used their authority to define who was going to have a place in this new society and who wouldn't. Right? So, according to their view, this new national community would only consist of strong, able bodied men and women of the so called Germanic Aryan race. Several groups of people were slated to not be allowed to remain in this national community. Nazi leadership, and unfortunately, most of the German people believed that some groups, namely Jewish people, but also the Roma and Sinti and people with disabilities, posed a deep and unalterable, unchangeable racial threat to Germany. And so that's why the Nazis' policies against those groups aimed to remove them from German society and then from German land and ultimately from life itself. Um, Now, of course, the Nazis didn't invent anti-Semitism. They didn't invent right hatred towards Jewish people. But one of the key factors that really defines Nazi anti-Semitism is that according to Nazis, Jewish people were not just a different culture or religion, but the Nazis viewed them as fundamentally a different race. And importantly, it was a inferior race, and according to their ideology. And so that is why the understanding of the quote unquote Jewish threat was that it was deeply biological, that it was racial, that it was tied to their blood. So Jews could not quit being Jews just by converting to Christianity, for example. And so that is why the Nazis believed that ultimately the policies needed to quote cure the Jewish question was the physical elimination, the mass extermination of Jewish people themselves. Now, the Nazis did target other groups of people like political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses, um, uh, several others, including trade unionists, people of the LGBTQ community. But they targeted these groups for their beliefs or their actions. Right? And according to Nazi thinking, these groups could be punished and taught to change their behaviors or to change their beliefs. So, this short lecture this evening is going to explore a group of victims whose story remained unspoken for decades after the end of the Nazi regime. So, together, we're going to look at why the Nazis saw people that we would today recognize as members of the LGBTQ community as a threat to their master race national community. And then we'll also look at the methods that the Nazis used to persecute the LGBTQ community. So I would like to start with the story of an artist named Richard Gruna, who you see here on the screen. He was born in August of 1903 in Flensburg, which was a small coastal city in northern Germany. He was born to a middle-class Christian family, and growing up, he found it to be impossible to live openly as a gay man in the small, relatively conservative hometown. So in February of 1933, he moved to Berlin, right, the capital of Germany, to experience the city's really world famous LGBTQ community. Now, after that might be surprising, right, that a vibrant queer and trans community existed in Germany at that time. But after Germany's defeat in World War One, the Emperor of Germany had to abdicate his throne, and a new democratic form of government was established. And this new government in Germany was known as the Weimar Republic. And it was during the Weimar Republic that minorities gained more rights and freedoms. So, for example, women were allowed to vote for the very first time under the democracy of the Weimar Republic. During this period, Berlin quickly became a kind of unofficial gay capital of the world, as LGBTQ folks carved out spaces for themselves across the city. They did so by establishing organizations, restaurants, nightclubs, stores, political advocacy groups, community centers, and a vibrant network of LGBTQ publications. Now, while there was much progress in Germany, including in the Weimar Republic, they had a series of laws against, quote, crimes against morality. Now, one of these laws was the national anti-gay law called Paragraph 175. This law had been on the books since the unification, the creation of Germany as a country in 1871. And paragraph 175 criminalized so-called unnatural indecency among men. And it's important to note here that the law applied only to men, and we'll explore why in just a moment. Now, so it was this vibrant atmosphere that drew Richard Gruna to Berlin. But unfortunately, the Nazi Party's leader, Adolf Hitler, had been named Chancellor of Germany just literally a couple of weeks before Richard Gruna arrived in the city. And the Nazis had made their stance against the LGBTQ community clear from early on. Um, And once they gained power in 1933, they began their attack on the LGBTQ community. And there are five key points to understanding why Nazi leadership saw LGBTQ folks as a threat to the national community. First, because sex was the means to creating the so-called master race, Nazi leadership was preoccupied with understanding and then controlling human sexuality. Right? So LGBTQ folks supposedly robbed the fatherland of children, which of course was believed to be the next generation of pure-blooded Germans. So uh, essentially, right, the Nazis believed that LGBTQ folks were a threat to the birth rate. And actually, I'll go back to show you this slide because in 1937, Heinrich Himmler told a group of his SS lieutenants that all things that take place in the sexual sphere are not the private affair of the individual, but signify the life and death of the nation. Now, the second thing is that the Nazis believed that homosexuality inverted the so-called natural order of genders. So it supposedly turned men weak and effeminate, which caused them to give up their leadership roles, which were believed to be masculine. Gay women allegedly became too masculine, thus forsaking their nurturing roles as homemakers, right, and the mothers who raised good Nazi children. The third thing is that out of everyone in the LGBTQ community, the Nazis believed that gay men were the most dangerous because men in Germany are the ones who had access to leadership positions, right? And that was not unique just to Germany at the time. Really, everywhere else in the world, it was men who had access to authority positions. So that is why the Nazis focused most of their tools and resources on trying to hunt down and find queer men. And I use the term queer here as an umbrella term to talk about men who might have identified as gay or bisexual or questioning or whatever that might be. The Nazis kind of collapsed all of these different identities that we recognize today under the term homosexual. They didn't really make a distinction between different identities or behaviors. So the next thing that we need to realize for understanding this history is that the German government, officials of the German government feared that queer men would band together into groups. And in other words, they feared that queer men would have more loyalty to each other than to the government and would form a, quote, state within a state that would challenge Hitler's authority. So even in 1937, a newspaper from the SS declared on a front page article that gay men were not just racial threats to the birth rate, but that they were a political threat and an enemy of the state. And the last thing is that most of Nazi leadership, and indeed most of the Western world at the time, did not believe that people were born gay or transgender. They believed that it was a set of behaviors, like a vice, that people chose to participate in. So that meant that it was allegedly a lifestyle that anyone, or indeed everyone, could be tempted into. So that's why the Nazis saw it as so dangerous. And since they saw it as a set of actions and not as someone's inborn identity, they thought that they could, quote, cure or re-educate LGBTQ folks and then reintegrate them back into German society. Now, because the Nazis believed that they could re-educate LGBTQ Germans, their policy, at least officially, never evolved into one of mass murder. But as we'll see, their policies were indeed very deadly. So again, the Nazis never planned to murder every single LGBTQ person, but it was their goal to completely eradicate LGBTQ spaces, culture, and community. Right? So their vision was a master race that was completely free of LGBTQ life. But we shouldn't forget that while the Nazis' policies focused on stopping LGBTQ behavior, it was LGBTQ people who were the victims of that violence. So now that we've talked about why the Nazis targeted LGBTQ folks, let's look at how they targeted them. Now, again, because homosexuality was viewed as something that could affect everyone, the Nazis' first step was to remove the so-called temptation from the public eye by dismantling the extensive network of LGBTQ meeting places, organizations, clubs, and publications. So in February of 1933, there was an order to shut down places of, quote, immorality. And so here is a photograph of uh, what was known as the El Dorado in Berlin. It was a famous LGBTQ nightclub. And what you can barely see, I don't know if you can see my mouse or my cursor on the screen, but above where the two police officers are standing, and you can see there's a big sign with it says vote for Hitler on ballot number one. So you can see the really big number one. And behind that sign, there's some rather small text. And that used to be the kind of entrance motto of the El Dorado. And in German, or in English, it translated to here it's okay, right? So it was actually quite openly advertising that here it was okay to be a little different. Um, so this picture was taken in March of 1933, so not even 2 months after the Nazis had come to power. And you can see they've shut it down. They've put swastikas and Hitler campaign posters all across the building. And so the uh, symbolism here was quite clear that here in the new Germany was not going to be okay. 2 months later, nearly 20,000 books, articles, and rare artifacts from the Institute for Sexual Science were destroyed in the famous book burnings in Berlin. That institute had advocated for LGBTQ rights for years, since it was founded in 1919. And the meaning of these public attacks, these public book burnings, or even the closing of the El Dorado, the meaning was clear, right? There was going to be no place for LGBTQ folks in the new Germany, not even in books. Now, and I put this next section in this presentation because it's particularly important for educators, because I can guarantee if you bring this, if you integrate this information into your courses with students, you're likely to get a question that asks about, well, were there any gay Nazis? And I can say that with experience because as many talks as I've given, that is usually one of the questions that comes up. And so we must acknowledge as educators that there were some LGBTQ folks who agreed with and supported the Nazi regime. The most famous example is this man whose name is Ernst Röhm. He was the leader of the Nazi SA or stormtroopers. They were also sometimes called the brown shirts. Röhm, as I said, he was the leader of this organization. He was also pretty openly gay, or homosexual was the term that he used at the time. And Hitler actually protected Röhm's reputation and said it was fine because he was such a good, loyal Nazi, at least until the summer of 1934. Because by that time, other Nazi leaders had convinced Hitler that Röhm was planning to overthrow him. And with a membership of over 3 million men in the SA, Röhm really could pose a real threat if he wanted to. So Hitler gave the order to have Röhm and other political threats executed without trial in June of 1934. So even though Röhm's homosexuality did not play a key factor in motivating Hitler to order his murder, the Nazis were incredibly clever propagandists, right? They recognized this chance to win over more followers. So right after Röhm was murdered, Hitler went on to the radio and told the nation that he had Röhm murdered as a show of how willing he was to supposedly purge Germany of the vice of homosexuality. So Hitler and other leaders fanned the flames of homophobia as a way to gain more supporters, especially on the political and religious right. Now, while the Nazis used paragraph 175 to arrest and charge queer men, there was not a similar law that targeted transgender people specifically. However, the Nazis were able to use several other laws that already existed. For example, one called Paragraph 183. This was the law against creating a public nuisance or kind of disturbing the public peace, if you will. And this was often used against trans people since so-called cross-dressing disturbed the public peace. And again, because the Nazis didn't recognize transgender identities as legitimate, some trans women were arrested under paragraph 175 as, quote, cross-dressing homosexual men. Similarly, there wasn't a single law against lesbians, but Nazi lawyers did debate at length whether they should change the law to prosecute gay women as well. But ultimately, there were four main arguments for keeping paragraph 175 limited just to men. And the first was that women didn't have positions of authority in Nazi Germany, so lesbians wouldn't pose a direct threat to the government, to the economy, or to the military, simply by nature of being a woman and not having access to those positions. Secondly, the Nazis argued that women were simply more naturally affectionate with each other. So it would take too many police resources to figure out what actions were acceptable and which ones were indecent. The third, and you might think that I'm just making all of this up, but we actually have the archival, the materials of lawyers sitting around conference tables and discussing this matter at length. They essentially doubted if lesbians existed at all. They said that women who had sexual encounters with each other simply just hadn't met the right man yet, and that they would give up their indecent behavior once they met a good German man. And finally, we have to remember that the ultimate goal of the Nazi government was the procreation of the so-called master race. And so the officials in charge of rewriting the criminal code asserted that, and this is a direct quote here, that women, quote, were always prepared for sex and could always get pregnant by force if necessary. Now, even though the Nazis chose not to add women to paragraph 175, they certainly subjected lesbians to terror, hostility, and violence through a network of other laws and policies. And I also just want to point out that the Gestapo and the SS didn't need any law whatsoever to snatch someone off the street or from their home and send them to a concentration camp under the designation of protective custody. There was no law needed and there was no legal process whatsoever. Now, Germany's anti-gay law, paragraph 175, was over 60 years old by the time the Nazis came to power. But Nazi leadership felt that the way that the law was worded put too many constraints on law enforcement and the judicial system. So in June of 1935, which is the same months that actually they were writing the famous Nuremberg race laws, they amended paragraph 175. When they did so, they left the definition of indecency purposefully vague so that they could arrest and convict as many men as possible. So after this 1935 amendment, anything from holding hands or a kiss or even a look that lingered too long could be considered indecent and thus punishable. In fact, one of the officials of the Justice Ministry even noted later on that it wasn't necessary that physical contact took place. He said, quote, "It suffices if homosexual acts are even just intended." In October of 1936, Heinrich Himmler established the Reich Central Office for Combating Homosexuality and Abortion. Located in Berlin, it sought to centralize the national efforts to protect the German birth rate. Officials collected so-called pink lists from local law enforcement offices, which contained the names of men who were even suspected of being gay. Entrapment or going undercover to catch gay men in the act became a common tool for law enforcement during this period. And once Nazi officials or police had apprehended a single gay person, they would use torture to force that person to turn over the names of other gay people that they knew. So, using these techniques, the Nazis could make arrests of individual people or large scale raids. So, in Hamburg, for example, over 230 men were arrested during a single night in 1937. Now, in addition to fines and a prison sentence of up to 10 years, men who were arrested under paragraph 175 could have their driver's licenses revoked. They could be fired from their jobs. They could have their college degrees taken away. They could be evicted from their housing or kicked out of um, political organizations, their church membership, any type of organization that they were a member of. The majority of Germans supported the Nazis' heavy-handed war against groups who were officially categorized as outsiders or social deviants. And even if Germans did not agree with the stories of excessive violence that were, rumored to be about the concentration camps, most people did not protest because that terrorization, that violence was leveled against groups who were already on the margins of society and garnered little sympathy. So while a majority of the German citizenry did nothing to question or resist the Nazis' campaign against homosexuality, a significant portion went further by actively participating in the persecution of this community. Now, Germans understood that their voice could activate the power and the violence of the Nazi government against people whom they denounced, right? And in fact, uh, out of all of the paragraph 175 cases that resulted in convictions, about a third of them resulted from civilian denunciations. So these were people, their bosses, their landlords, their neighbors, their coworkers, in some cases, even their own family members, turning them in to the authorities. That was also the case with our artist, Richard Bruna, right? Because the Nazis had already begun shutting down LGBTQ meeting places. By the time he moved to Berlin, gay people had begun meeting in private. As I said, Bruna came from a relatively well-to-do family, so he had a pretty large apartment in Berlin. So he started hosting parties for his gay and lesbian friends in 1934. And by all of the archival evidence we have, they were pretty lively, festive occasions. But unfortunately, one of the attendees of the parties spent their time noting the names, addresses, and professions of the men who were there. And we don't know anything about her motivation, but she turned over a long list of names to the Nazis. So in December of 1934, a few weeks before Christmas, Richard Gruna and 70 other men were arrested as a result of this single denunciation. Now, in the face of unprecedented terror from the government and also from civilians, LGBTQ folks navigated their new realities to survive and to resist in the ways that were possible to them. For example, a group of lesbian friends in Berlin who loved to meet up along the river there in the city, they established a fake organization to provide a safe alibi for the fact of why they continued to meet regularly. They founded a fake rowing club, despite the fact that none of them knew how to row. They went and bought a boat so that way they could have it sitting there in case anyone stopped to ask what they were doing. This group of women meeting together, they could say, "Oh, we're here for as part of our rowing club." Now, some LGBTQ folks actively fought back against the Nazi regime. Willem Arendeus was an openly gay artist in the Netherlands. And after the Nazi invasion of his country, he formed a resistance group and he led the bombing of the Amsterdam Registry Office in March of 1943 to prevent the Nazis from using those records to identify Dutch Jews and send them to the east to the death camps. Unfortunately, Willem was caught by the Nazis after the bombing. I will say the bombing was successful and they destroyed over 800,000 ID cards, again, making it impossible and really hard, or at least really hard for the Nazis to identify who was Jewish and therefore saved them from being deported. As I said, Willem unfortunately was caught by the Nazis. He was sentenced to death in a show trial. And his final words to his lawyer before his execution were, "Please let it be known that homosexuals are not cowards." Now, after the Nazi amendment of paragraph 175, the number of arrests and convictions of gay men skyrocketed by an astounding 740%. In total, the Nazis arrested about 100,000 men under paragraph 175, and over half of those were convicted. Now, an intersectional approach helps us understand why not every single man arrested was convicted and sent to prison. Because if someone was deemed a pure Aryan and it was their first accusation of being gay, prosecutors tended to be more lenient. However, if someone was gay and Jewish, on the other hand, the Nazis saw that person's Jewish identity as irredeemable, and therefore they were targeted and treated as Jews. We also know that people were more likely to be persecuted if their gender expression did not conform to the standards of the time. So, for an example, an effeminate gay man or a masculine lesbian, they were much more likely to be targeted than those who fit the traditional gender norms. Now, out of the men who were arrested, somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 so-called repeat offenders were sent to concentration camps after serving their normal prison sentence. These were men who were arrested more than once or who were deemed a particular threat to the public safety. Richard Gruna was one of these men. He was sent to the concentration camp after his time in prison because the Nazis argued he had hosted parties that seduced so many German men into a lifestyle of indecency that he needed to be placed in protective custody. Now, when all prisoners were sent to the concentration camps, they were assigned a color-coded triangle badge that identified the reason why they were being imprisoned. And you can see here on this chart, I'll just walk through the colors with you. Red was for political prisoners. Green was for what the Nazis called career criminals. Blue was for immigrants. Purple for Jehovah's Witnesses. Pink was for the men who had been in prison under paragraph 175. And then the end, there was a black triangle that was what the Nazis called asocials or social deviants. So this was kind of a miscellaneous category of people who didn't fit into what the Nazis viewed as ideal members of the national community. And you can see kind of halfway down the chart, if you were Jewish, your colored triangle would be laid over a yellow triangle to make a Star of David that identified you that way in the camp. Now, in many ways that the violence against gay prisoners were similar to the ways or similar to the violence that other concentration camp inmates faced. But according to survivor testimony that we have, we also know that gay prisoners were often kept isolated from other prisoners. They were given harsher work details and sometimes less food. Allegedly, these harsher conditions were meant to toughen up gay men and reorient them back to being straight. Gay prisoners were also subjected to gruesome medical experiments that sought to discover a biological cure to what the Nazis increasingly called the social disease of homosexuality. There are even documented instances of the systematic murder of entire groups of gay prisoners in the camps. In addition to violence by the guards, gay prisoners also had to face discrimination and harassment from their fellow prisoners. Now, after the Holocaust, one survivor reflected on fellow inmate Carl Kipp, who was a singer and performer. The survivor noted that Carl had a powerful and melodious baritone and was a good person, but the pink triangle on his chest told everyone that he was homosexual. And because of that, he was the, quote, loneliest of the lonely in the orchestra. Records do show that transgender folks were sent to concentration camps, and they were often treated based on their sex assigned at birth. Lesbians were sent to the camps as well, though it's difficult to ascertain accurate statistics at the moment, since the SS did not label lesbians as a distinct prisoner group. We know that most lesbians were sent to Ravensbrück, which was the concentration camp for women, where they were often labeled as asocials and therefore assigned a black triangle. Now, the fact that lesbians and transgender folks were labeled as socials rather than under a separate category does not change the fact that lesbians were imprisoned and persecuted in the camps. Now, Richard Bruna, the artist who we've been following, was sent to Sachsenhausen in October of 1937. 2.5 years later, he was transferred to Flossenburg concentration camp, where he became, and you can see it from the top right corner, he became prisoner number 2553. During liberation in April of 1945, Bruna managed to escape and eventually made his way back home to reunite with his sister. But in this regard, Richard was incredibly lucky because despite the Nazis' policies on paper of trying to cure and re-educate gay prisoners, the reality tells a different story. We know that about 65% of all men who were imprisoned for being gay were killed in the camps. Now, after the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Allied powers had a policy of releasing inmates who were in prison because of their religious, racial, or political reasons. But they said they needed to keep the so-called common criminals incarcerated. Because gay men had broken a national law, the Allies considered them to be criminals. So therefore, Pink Triangle prisoners who still had any time left on their sentence were transferred from the liberated concentration camps by the Allies to a nearby prison where they were forced to serve out the rest of their sentence. Sometimes that might have been 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, or even up to 2 to 3 years. Now, the Allies also chose not to get rid of the Nazi version of paragraph 175 during their attempts to denazify Germany. So when East and West Germany were created in 1949, both of those countries had the Nazi version of the anti-gay law written into their criminal codes. East Germany, the communist half, quickly reverted the law back to its original version, and as a result, the number of gay men arrested in East Germany was relatively low. West Germany, the democratic capitalistic path, on the other hand, upheld the Nazi version of the law multiple times in court and arrested about 100,000 men with it between 1949 and 1969 when it was finally amended, though not fully repealed. So if you extend that graph of annual paragraph 175 convictions to include its full lifespan, this is what it looks like. Now, Richard Gruna was one of those 100,000 men arrested by the Nazi version of the law after the Nazis had been defeated. It's hard to imagine what he felt surviving the Holocaust and then being arrested again in a democracy under the same Nazi law. He applied to gain recognition as a victim of Nazism, which would have been really important. It would have made him eligible for legal aid and for financial compensation to rebuild his life. But the authorities rejected his claim since he had been imprisoned for being gay. He passed away penniless in Kiel in November of 1984. Now, after the Holocaust, society tried to silence Richard Gruna from speaking about his experience as a gay victim of Nazi persecution, but all of us, as educators, as learners, commit to keeping his memory alive. Thank you very much. And at this point, I would be happy to pause and take any questions that you might have about the history that I just presented, about clarification on anything. And actually, what I'm going to do is just stop sharing my screen for a moment so that I can see the Zoom room a little bit better. So again, thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point.
I have a question, Jake.
Absolutely.
Uh, it kind of relates to the mention that you made of the occupied Netherlands. So I was wondering, as the Nazis occupied other countries, were they intent on identifying and imprisoning gay men in those other countries as well, or was that not part of their emphasis at that point?
So it depended on essentially where they were, which country, which territory they were annexing. And of course, as everything, it was driven by Nazi racial ideology. And so when they invaded and annexed Western European territories like the Netherlands, like France, they brought paragraph 175 with them. When they began annexing and taking over Eastern European territories, they didn't bring paragraph 175.
Mm.
And as essentially the logic was that paragraph 175 was needed to protect the racial stock of quote civilized races like northern Europeans like the Dutch. However, they said, you know what, it's essentially like it's these Eastern European civilizations or peoples, they said they're subhuman or inferior anyway. So of course it's not surprising that they would engage in this indecency, and it really doesn't matter because they're going to be subjugated under these different laws anyway. And so in the instances where we have examples of, for example, Czech people being arrested under paragraph 175, it's when they were caught um, in indecency with a German person,
Mm.
for example, like a German soldier. And so it was when it was kind of considered like a more direct threat to a German is when they enforced the law. Yeah, it was a really great question, Annie. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, I do see a question pop up in the chat. So Pete asked, when the camps were liberated, how did the Allied powers treat those arrested? Did under paragraph 175, did some countries offer asylum, or were there similar responses to what happened in West Germany? Um, so yes. Oh, I think I accidentally raised my hand. um, so thank you so much for that question, Pete. As um, you know, most of the most of queer and trans people in Germany, especially those who were in the concentration camps, certainly hoped that the defeat of the Nazis by the Allied liberators would mean an end to their persecution. But unfortunately, they just really were that hope was misfounded. So clearly, the concentration camps were shut down. But as I mentioned, um, gay survivors who had still had time left on their prison sentence were sent immediately to prisons. Um, and I will also add that because the concentration camps existed outside of the German judicial system, any time that someone spent in the camp didn't count towards their prison sentence. So, right, if they had been sentenced beforehand, then they still probably had months or years left on their sentence because being in the camps didn't count towards that. And so I don't have the statistics available in front of me, but I would venture to say most of the survivors still had time left on their sentence and therefore were sent to prisons to serve out the rest of their terms. I would to your question about other countries. Um, Unfortunately, no, this is not a happy part of history um, because all the liberators, including the Russians, had anti-LGBTQ laws on the books in their home countries, right? The U.S. didn't have a national anti-gay law, but every single state that existed at the time had an anti-LGBTQ law, and so it's not really a surprise um, that when they occupied Germany, they wouldn't suddenly become like pro-gay rights, um, and so they you know institutionalized homophobia was um, the law of the land in these countries, and so there was no country that kind of took them in as refugees or offered a place of refuge. That would not come until decades after the war was over. At least 20 years it took West Germany to finally amend paragraph 175 and get rid of the Nazi version. I see someone else is asking a question. Yes, it's being recorded. Um, and so Annie and Stacy will be able to tell you more about like how you can access that. But are there blacks or Africans who were part of the LGBT community involved in these actions? There is a new book that has just been published. And oh my gosh, I have completely blanked on the name of the person that it's about and the author. So I will look it up because it's the first research that I am aware of that it's identified an LGBTQ black. It was an African American, if I'm not mistaken, who went to Germany um, and then was persecuted under the anti-gay laws. Um, and so that is literally the only story that I am personally aware of. And the book either just came out or it's about to come out, so I haven't read it yet. But it's certainly number one on my reading list. Um, but thank you for bringing that up. Okay. We have another question. I can take probably one or two more questions, and then we'll move on to the next section, and then we'll have more time for more questions after that. So the next question is: I'm a little confused about Ernst Röhm. How was he able to successfully persecute the gay community as an openly gay store trooper? Can you please talk more about him? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, this is where an intersectional approach is important to understanding this the reality of Ernst Röhm, right? Because he was only able to be tolerated in this movement because uh, he had certain levels of privilege in the movement, right? He was number one, a man. He was cisgender, and he was traditionally, he was traditionally masculine, right? Um, and so, and on top of that, he was incredibly racist and incredibly anti-Semitic and incredibly committed to all of the Nazi ideals. In fact, he joined the Nazi Party even before Hitler himself joined the Nazi Party. So he was one of what they called the old fighters. Um, he was a veteran, he was working class, and he was really able to connect with that demographic. And so he was incredibly useful to the Nazi Party for a long time. He helped build the SS up from, sorry, the SA rather, the SA, too many acronyms, uh, built them up from just kind of a group of ragtag fighters in the street to a organized group of 3 million people. So again, Hitler very directly uh, protected Rome from rumors, from slander, um, because he was useful to the movement. I think your question might be like, how could he, as an openly gay person, persecute other people who are gay? And that's because like this idea of community through shared identity, not everyone shares that, right? So for him, his identity as a Nazi was much more important than the fact than much more important than his desires for other men. He felt no type of affinity for other men who does other homosexual men, and I would venture to, he didn't write anything about it, but I would venture to argue that if someone made being homosexual their identity, like he was very much against that. He was first and foremost a Nazi who happened to like other men, and so for him it didn't seem like a contradiction that he would be going after these quote unquote effeminate womanly men who were indecent because they were just he had no affinity with them. Again, we can look at that and see these contradictions, and we can also see the fact that he was kept around or protected only as long as he was useful. But as soon as he became a liability or a threat to the movement, like, the Nazis got rid of him overnight and then blamed his homosexuality for why they got rid of him. And so I think that's a pretty big lesson for even like queer folks today who belong to radical and racist and homophobic movements. They think that somehow their support of those racist beliefs or the other beliefs of the movement would somehow protect them, but ultimately it doesn't. These movements we've seen time and time again throughout history will purge LGBTQ folks from the movement as soon as they're not useful anymore. So I appreciate that question. And then I see a final question for this section is a great was especially interested in the lesbians who pretended to be rowers to meet up. Can you share some other stories of resistance under the Nazis? Absolutely. And you know what? Actually, this will be a really great transition to my next section because I'll be able to show you where you can find stories of resistance. So let me share my screen again. All right. So you should see now what I thought I would do is walk you through our organization's website to show you the different digital tools that you have at your disposal. Um, and I just looked at the time. Man, we have gone through a lot of time. We've got 15 minutes left, but so I think what we'll do is we'll just focus on exploring these resources and answering your questions. The first, this is our homepage. You can find it at pinktrianglelegacies.org. But what would be most useful, I think, to all of you as educators is our Learn page. So from at the top, you can just go click on Learn, or you can go directly to pinktrianglelegacies.org/learn. And this is our landing page where we have all of the resources that we've created. They're all free. You don't need to log in. It's just available and accessible to you. So we have a number of different types of formatting because we know that people learn in different ways. Some people like to watch videos, listen to podcasts, or to read. So we do have an overview essay here that essentially presents all of the information that I gave you in that opening lecture. Everything is hyperlinked. It's cited. It's, there's sources for further reading. So you can find that there. The one thing that I'm really excited about is kind of the key pillar of our educational resources is our LGBTQ Stories from Nazi Germany initiative. So on this one, we have profiles that tell the real stories of queer and trans people who lived in Nazi Europe. In fact, we're going to rename this Nazi Europe because we've started to find and collect stories that are beyond just Germany. And so you can see here, we've got, I think, about 16 or 17 stories at this point. Lesbians, gay men, trans folks, gender nonconforming folks. So to be able to tell a number of different perspectives. So I'd love let's look at Frida, because someone asked about resistance. Frida was a Dutch lesbian musician who joined Willemar and Deus in the bombing of the Amsterdam registry office that I mentioned earlier. One of the cool things that we've learned about that group is that it wasn't just Willem and Frida who were openly gay. In fact, that resistance group was almost entirely made up of LGBTQ people. And so you can see here, each of these profiles has a digital essay where we have pictures and documents available. We include those. This is Frida. Let me find this picture. After the bombing, Frida knew that the Nazis were looking for a woman named Frida Belinfanta. So she decided just to not be a woman named Frida Belinfanta for a while. And so she decided to stay in Amsterdam, but she disguised herself by dressing and living as a man for 3 months. And so she was very proud of her disguise because apparently she passed her own mother in the street twice, and her mom didn't recognize her. But you will see, of course, we have our sources and further reading. Each of these profiles comes with a downloadable PDF that you could use, in your classroom. It's the same information, just summarized, shortened so that it will fit on a front page PDF. Each of the profiles also comes with, I'm not going to click on it because I know my computer will lag and it won't load. But it comes with a mini documentary, so about a 3 or 5 minute YouTube video. It's the same information, but it's presented kind of read and produced by one of our interns who wrote the this kit on the individual person. And then each, this is something we're currently working on, so not all of them have it, but most of them right now do also have a human read audio version of the essays as well. So in case folks would prefer to listen and learn. And then we've been working with our partners down in Mexico City to have each of our resources professionally translated into Spanish as well. And so again, all of the information is there, but in Spanish. So that was our stories initiative. I'll take us back to the landing page. Um, of course, you can get the book that most of the research is based from. We have collected a vetted list of external resources that have been created by other organizations. We went through and made sure that everything that we put on our website is vetted and historically accurate, and we've organized them for you by type. So you can find all of those here. And then at the bottom, we also have resources by theme. And so this is where we've broken it up by, if you're looking at information on trans or gender nonconforming people, on queer men, queer women, or we have the section here on resistance. So let's take a look at that. So again, it will provide a little bit of a framing essay for you as well. And then down at the bottom, we've identified some key resources that relate to the theme, and also showcase our featured profile, which was on Frida, who we just saw. Now, I will say what I would love to be able to offer you is, I'm going to bring up this slide. We have created a classroom ready activity that can be used in your classroom. It's not on our website just yet. We're working to update it, but you can access it by scanning this QR code here. I'll also drop the link to it in the chat. And once you do, it'll take you to a form that you can fill out, and it will grant you access to the classroom ready activity. It has well, let me find the chat so I can add the link to it for you. So there's the link if you would like to just click on it. And I know what I'm going to do is just show you one quick image of what the classroom activity looks like. You'll get the educator packet, and that will walk you through step by step what the goals are, how to structure it, you could use it to fit your particular classroom. But then the bulk of the activity itself is essentially primary source analysis. And so what we've done is found primary sources related to the history, offered translations for them so that your students can read them, hear what these people said in their own words. And then each of the documents comes with discussion questions and a prompt on how to report out or write about this particular person that's showcased in the primary source activity. So we have one on a trans man named Garrett Cotter. We have one, actually, it was on Frida Belinfanta. And then the last one is on a man named Ernst Pack, who was sent to a concentration camp. And so the document there is literally the Nazis writing down why they want to send Ernst to a concentration camp. So you get to read in the Nazis' own words what they thought about homosexuality and why they thought that it was a threat to the German society. And I will say that in your educator packet, everyone, whether it's the educator packet or the student packet, you get a link to a 20-minute YouTube version of the lecture that I gave at the beginning of tonight's presentation. And so that way, you don't have to feel like you have to be ready to give a whole lecture on the topic. they can watch this video and get a 20-minute primer on the history. All right, so I'm gonna pause there again. We've got about looks like 7 more minutes. So I'll be happy to answer any more questions that you have or show you anything more about the resources that we have to offer.
There are a couple of people who've asked some questions in the chat related to getting access to the educator packet. Um,
Okay, so I just looked, so
yes.
it's I'll drop the chat in there again. Um, there is one, I see which one should we select? There's one that says that should say March 2026. I think it says the Social History Project. So you can just select that one. Or yeah, didn't attend an event, which is given the link. Either way, you'll get access to it.
I had a question that's not necessarily directly related to the resources.
Sure.
Um, so I am in Dagmar Herzog's class over at the Graduate Center, and so
Wow.
I'm also a teacher by training, so this is kind of perfect for me. But one of our papers, we have to do like a presentation paper, and so I'm doing mine on the persecution of gay men in Nazi Germany, and specifically on propaganda. So I was wondering if you have any insights as to how they balanced having to get the propaganda out into the world, how the Nazis balanced having to get the propaganda out without, while also discouraging open conversations about sexuality.
Yeah. Um, First of all, tell Dagmar I said hi.
Oh, will do.
She actually just gave us a really incredible document. Our organization is premiering a traveling exhibit in June, and so we had consulted with Dagmar about something, and so she gave us a access to a document that we've now included in the exhibit because it's incredible kind of lens into this history. So I really appreciate her work and her research on the topic. I mean, clearly Dagmar would have a lot to say about this, the balancing act of propaganda to persecute and to decriminalize homosexuality, but also the fact that if you're talking about it, and especially because the Nazis believed that it was a temptation that anyone could give into, just the sheer fact of talking about it carried the so-called risk of tempting people into the lifestyle by making it knowledgeable, right? And so, you know, I would say the Nazis were not always they were skilled propagandists, but sometimes they were just super heavy-handed, right? I would say that on the one hand, a lot of the laws that they used and the propaganda talking points that they used to talk about it was purposely vague. So, right, they didn't always say homosexuality or the homosexual lifestyle. They said indecency. We're going after indecency between men, right? Which could include a number of different things. And even sometimes in the official paperwork of police records, they won't say, homosexual. They might reference paragraph 175, but they would often just even write, this man was accused or convicted of unnatural indecency. And so even just kind of using these um, euphemisms was a way to talk about it without actually naming it. And again, even some of the laws that they passed at the very beginning that shut down LGBTQ meeting places, they were done with laws that said that they were closing sites of immorality. Um, on the other hand, there were times when the regime spoke about it very plainly and very openly, sometimes on the floor of the parliament. I mean, in 1927, before the Nazis even gained power, there were Wilhelm Frick gave a speech that it said if we continue to let homosexuality spread, it's going to lead to the downfall of the German nation. And then, of course, I mentioned after Rome was murdered, I mean, Hitler himself took to the national airwaves to talk about, the homosexuality was a threat even to the Nazi organizations themselves. But don't worry, he says, I was judge, jury, and executioner, and I took care of the problem, and I've saved Germany from this threat. He said, and this is the quote that always stands out to me. He says that mothers should feel safe in sending their sons to our organizations, whether it is to the Hitler Youth or to the Army or to the SS. They should know that their sons are not going to be run by what he called ludicrous apes. So again, sometimes they spoke about it very directly and bluntly. And sorry, one last point that made me think of, right? They knew at that point, right? We talk about the Nazis coming to power in January of 1933, but when they came to power, their position was actually quite fragile. So just because they had authority didn't mean that everybody was on their side. In fact, only 38% of Germans had voted for them. And so they knew that they had a lot of work to do to try to win over more Germans to get them into line with their ideals. And so fanning the flames of homophobia through propaganda was actually a strategic choice in trying to win over conservative voters who otherwise didn't necessarily agree with the Nazi party policies. Right? Other people might have been conservative, but they said, I don't know, the Nazis, they're too focused on Jews, they're too focused on this or that. But the Nazis knew that focusing on homophobia would kind of rile up their base and unite the factions of the right in a way that other issues didn't.
Sounds familiar.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sophie. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your attention, for your really great questions. I know we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of the content here. I hope that you will utilize the resources that I shared with you. Take the time to explore the website, and I will say, all of us at the Pink Triangle Legacies Project, we are all educators. We're all brand new. Informing this organization, and we're really open to feedback. So if you use any of these resources in your classroom or really in any context, and we would love to hear how it goes. Like, yes, we would love to hear if it goes well. That would be great to hear. But also if it doesn't go well, if you're like Jake, it would just be a lot better if it was formatted a little bit differently, or if I could do this. We would love to make improvements to the resources so that they're better in the future. So please, our contact information is on the website. So just feel free to reach out and let us know how it goes. And thank you so much again to Annie and to Stacy for inviting me and for creating this opportunity for us to come together and learn together.
Thank you so much, Jake. It was really, really useful and interesting. And I do encourage people check out Jake's book if you have the chance. It's really invaluable.
Thank you.
Have a
All
good
right.
night, everyone.
Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.